When I think about powerful women, I think about Alice Paul, Lucy Burns, and Ida B. Wells, who led a progressive movement. Today, I wanted to speak about that movement, and it's a movement that gave women the rights to vote. It was called the suffrage movement, which faced various obstacles, and these women were key orchestrators. As Schuessler says in the New York Times, she called it a complex history of struggle. As a member of the National Organization of Women, which is a feminist organization, we always like to celebrate the suffrage movement. And there is an Alice Paul chapter in South Jersey and a museum in North Jersey where Alice Paul was born. She was born on January 11th in 1985. She was the daughter of T.C. Perry and a wealthy Quaker businessman embracing gender equality, education for women, and working to improve society. Her mother was a suffragette, and her mother brought young Alice, to suffragette meetings where this influenced Alice to become an activist. Alice went on to Columbia University to receive her education, and she obtained a master's at Columbia University in sociology. So Alice went over to England to do some social welfare work, and that's where she met Lucy Burns. She met her in the women's movement over in England. Lucy was born in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. She came from an Irish Catholic family, social welfare says, and Lucy recruited Alice into the suffrage movement over there in England, where together they learned methods of protest, picketing, and hunger strikes. So together they decided to bring those things they learned back to the United States, where they joined, the USA, where they actually joined the National Women's Party and attempted to go through Congress to pass the amendment. It was unsuccessful, and the National Women's Party just thought they were radical. And at the time, the National Women's Party was really tied into President Woodrow Wilson, in which it was more like a women's social country club. And so, being unsuccessful, Lucy and Alice decided to go and form the progressive movement. So, being that our country, they were at World War I was going on at the time. And so the National Women's Movement told them, you have to back off, because this isn't the time to pass the amendment, because there are soldiers dying at war, our men are dying at war, and it's not popular. So the war broke out, and because of the war effort, the National Women's Movement abandoned the progressive women's agenda. And eventually what happened is they didn't care. They just said, we're going to take this to the streets. It is time to pass women's rights to vote. And so their methods of recruiting people were they went into factories and they told factory workers, look, your voice is a vote. Join the movement, pass literature around. If we can pass the rights to vote, you're going to be able to vote for that fire escape to put in that factory. And, this changes things. So your vote is very important. And they went to the streets with protest signs, and one said, Mr. President, how long must we wait for liberty? And as history stories claim, on November 14th, 1917, 33 women were arrested after protesting, and they endured brutal beatings. That was in history. And there were hunger strikes. And they were force-fed in those prisons. And it is said that a senator's wife, while they were incarcerated, slipped her husband. She was involved in the movement, and she slipped her husband a note that told him what was going on inside the prisons. And so that her husband, who was a senator, slipped that note to the press, and that blew up in the press. And people were infuriated. You're going to treat a senator's wife like that? You're going to treat women like this in a prison? And so the movement gained popularity with constituents. So Also, there were abolitionists that were also rooted in the movement. History stories say that abolitionists groups such as American Anti-Slavery Society provided women with opportunities to speak, write, and organize on behalf of enslaved people, and in some cases gave them leadership roles. So they were already strong from that movement, and they were already a voice in the women's movement. And so the suffrage movement tried to tell them, look, back off. We don't want you to show up in these protests and show up because people are racist, senators are racist. You might actually obstruct the vote count in the end, you know. So they didn't care. They said, look, we're showing up. We want a voice in this. We want the right to vote. So suffrage activist Ida B. Wells of the Chicago-based anti-lynching and women's suffrage activists made sure that Black women were present in the movement. So now you could see. You could see how difficult it was. And you can also see that it was a complex history of struggle. And now you can see where it went. And the 19th Amendment wasn't, in any case, an easy piece of legislation to pass. Women suffered, including the abolitionists. They were incarcerated. Many women, they were brutally beaten, and some gave up their lives. And they even came such opposition, even during World War I, in a time where it just wasn't popular to do what they did. So on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, giving all women the right to vote. This right to vote paved the way that gave women the voice we have today in the elections we vote in today, giving us freedoms and a voice in legislation. The amendment passed at the very last minute. It is said that a senator received a last-minute phone call from his mother. We don't know what she said to him on the phone, but she surely did influence him the last minute. And the women's right to vote passed by one vote.